That's what you're doing.
Losing this upon you. And so I'm going to leave you with this 20 seconds. I can't imagine what you think is going to happen when a parent carries their dead child out of a crushed house in front of Channel 2 eyewitness news truck. And that is as much time as I have.
I'll respond in one way, and that is probably where informed previously that, the tree code and the forestry plan are under revision. Is going to take a couple of years. I think I could speak for the whole commission to say that we're very aware of increasing risk with climate change. We're also very aware of the fundamental and important effect of the canopy on mitigating climate change, right? So it's always a risk benefit. And I think those things will be taken into consideration in rewriting the code. We thank you for your time. We know you've come a few times, and we are looking at the safety plan. In fact, it's on the agenda today if you want to listen in. And we're all very concerned and interested in it. So that's what I can say.
Can I take 30 more seconds?
Sure.
Make a suggestion. Allow someone to remove a tree as long as they're willing to replant. And you could also assess a reforestation fee. So you could say, we're also going to charge you a fee for $200 for an urban reforestation project. So replant the tree and then maybe 2 trees somewhere else. Be flexible, be creative, be empathetic to the real risks that people feel like they're having to endure at times.
Thanks for your input. Yes,
Okay.
we appreciate it. Thanks. Okay, let's see, moving on. Perfect. City Foresters report.
Good morning, commissioners, staff, guests. New staff also. I have for you today 7 items. First up, the large tree amendment. This Tuesday, the Planning Commission voted unanimously to advise council to remove the expiration date that's currently in code. Today on your agenda, as you know, you'll discuss this and decide on the Forestry Commission's advice to City Council on this topic. And please note, we have requested Wednesday, October 2nd from 2 to 3 p.m. time certain on the City Council agenda for council to deliberate and decide on the proposed amendment, which again is to remove that expiration date. The second item, as I've been trying to do each meeting, I'd like to give you an update on the Portland Urban Forest Plan project. So last month, Linda Udelman, our staff member who's leading that project, presented to you all on the project. And since then, the project team has been reviewing different ways to set canopy targets, different types of canopy targets. And the team's also preparing a suite of recommended actions, to help achieve plan vision and goals. Once the draft canopy targets and actions are ready, the project team will present them to you all here at the UFC and hear your feedback. That discussion will likely take place in early fall this year. Next item, some of you may have noticed a Willamette Week article yesterday titled "The City Plants Trees to Shade a Cooking East Portland but Can't Seem to Keep Them Alive." I'll put the link in the chat when I'm done, but I'll also put a link to our online chat for you. I wanted to clarify for you that the survival rate for urban forestry's tree planting programs is quite high at least 93%. This information is in the planting reports we provide online each year. Update them annually. Thanks to robust contractor training, including in languages other than English, and oversight and monitoring of new trees, all of which urban forestry developed because we understand the importance of tree establishment. Stressed trees are detected quickly and follow-up with the contractor occurs promptly. This is how the 227 struggling trees mentioned in the article were identified some weeks ago by urban forestry. And we began working then with the contractor to increase watering on those trees, and some are recovering. Meantime, this 227 trees represents 3% of the 7,750 trees currently under establishment by urban forestry and our contractors. 3%. Hold please, and wait to the end, that's okay. Yeah. Our contractors are valuable partners and do a good job, including Cascadian Landscapers, which was named in the article. Contractors are also responsible for replacing any trees that die at their own cost. There's no additional cost to the city, no additional cost to public funding sources. This is a contractual requirement developed specifically by urban forestry. That was a significant achievement and a way for us to ensure fiscal responsibility. Some mortality of young trees must be expected and will continue. Cities, and especially rights of way and similarly hardscaped areas, are far from ideal habitat for trees. They are living beings, and more weather extremes are occurring due to the climate crisis, including this year, the heat wave we had earlier this summer, and the deep freeze this past winter, and those have impacts on tree stock and newly planted trees. Also, urban forestry was not involved in the Mill Park neighborhood tree planting effort in 2023 that was mentioned in the article, where a number of trees died after planting. Urban forestry had nothing to do with that situation. Urban forestry staff will continue working closely with contractors to ensure the trees receive the water they need, and non-viable trees will be replaced and the replacements watered by those contractors. Regarding tree planting volume, which was also mentioned in the article, urban forestry plants 3,500 trees each year, which is the maximum feasible given the resources available to us. The PSEF Equitable Tree Canopy Program will enable us to add at least 15,000 trees to that number over 5 years, and we're really excited about that. Finally, in the meantime, we're really happy to see Portlanders and the media's interest in trees. Casey, did you have a specific question about that? And then I'll continue with my other items to keep time.
Yeah, thank you. Did you have a mortality expectation? Like if you do a restoration, they expect there's a given amount of mortality, so they overplant. Do you have a number that you've added to that?
So later in my report today, I'll talk about future potential agenda items, and the planting staff coming and talking about the planting program will be part of it. So that might be a good question to ask them.
Okay. Also, do you know who did the Mill Park planting that they're talking about?
According to the media, it was Bureau of Transportation.
So one quickie question that could either be part of the report or some other time too, related to that is, Since we'll be working, especially with the expansion with so many community organizations, is there a way to have a better kind of safety net around the trees that they plant in terms of, requesting, stewards or us do some of the watering or that type of thing? Since in the end, we're responsible for the canopy, not just what we plant. But, so
Good question, and volunteers and community groups are involved in planting and tree care, and I think
Yeah.
that's something we can discuss when we have the planting program
nice.
on the agenda.
Okay.
My next item is a PSEF update. PSEF, everyone knows what PSEF is by now, right? Portland Clean Energy Community Benefits Fund. The Equitable Tree Canopy Work Group convened earlier this week for the first time. And that was largely an organizing, getting to know each other and housekeeping meeting. They are planning to meet every other month. Again, the role of that group is to advise the city, so Bureau of Planning and Sustainability and us in Urban Forestry on the Equitable Tree Canopy Program. And those members bring relevant knowledge and representation to the work. They have backgrounds in tree planting, care, community engagement, canopy equity, and similar things. Reminder that your representative from the Forestry Commission on that work group is Casey Clapp. Thank you, Commissioner Clapp. And in future meetings, we look forward to having Commissioner Clapp share the project work group progress with you. Thanks, Casey. PSEF funding for other programs, including street tree maintenance, private property tree maintenance, financial assistance, reducing or waiving non-development permitting fees, and public education about trees in the urban forest, was first received by Urban Forestry on July 1st, so very recently. Also, at this point, we are working between the service areas and the bureaus to establish metrics, expectations, and kind of broad metrics and expectations and written agreements on how those funds will be used between the teams. As with Equitable Tree Canopy, you may recall, these are all brand new program ideas. The programs don't exist yet, and therefore they're not staffed. That'll be an early step we're just starting on. We're really excited about having the funds to build these great services. We'll work as quickly as we can. However, please know that developing and implementing the programs will take time. Hiring, which I mentioned is an initial phase that we'll do, starts with developing what are the positions that are needed, working with the Bureau of Human Resources to figure out what city classifications are appropriate, before we even get to the point of being able to post the positions, recruit for them, and then have candidate selection processes. That whole process typically takes anywhere from 6 to 10 months per position, provided the recruitment is successful. So of course, we'll keep you posted on that. And again, we're really excited to get working on it. My fifth item is I'll also put in the chat after I'm done. Unfortunately, heritage tree #1, the Burrell elm, which was on 10th Avenue in Southwest, had to be removed due to the loss of numerous large limbs over several months, overall declining health, and especially given its high traffic location, presenting a significant safety risk. Up until the most recent large limb failure, several staff from Urban Forestry had created a restoration plan for the tree, which would have involved reducing the limbs and crown back to help the tree concentrate and refocus its energy, a practice we call retrenchment that can be used especially with veteran trees to help preserve them. However, after that plan was created, another large limb loss made that plan no longer tenable. I want to recognize the Urban Forestry Heritage Tree and operations teams for effectively planning and communicating the project, and our permitting and regulations team for also helping with that role. There were many staff involved. The removal project was difficult. However, it was done quickly and safely with no injuries, no damage, not even a cracked paver, in spite of each of several trunk sections weighing anywhere from 800 to 900 pounds apiece, needing to be brought to the ground, lifted and hauled away. Sixth item, with the agenda materials you received, And now on the Urban Forestry Commission website, there's a, what we call a one-pager with information about urban forestry storm response. I wanted to draw your attention to that. The information there includes that although of course impactful and unfortunate tree failures due to storms are highly infrequent, showcasing the resilience of urban trees. And large, long-lived trees have adapted to survive a variety of weather conditions. That is how they became large and long-lived. In the January 2024 storm, for example, Urban Forestry responded to 785 tree emergency service requests. This amounts to about 0.00127% of Portland's 1.4 million public trees that became dangerous or otherwise impacted public rights of way, roads, and properties. Finally, a little bit about upcoming agendas. We are looking into having agenda time and information about the Harborton project, the PGE project to put a high transmission line through Forest Park. We also want to bring you the latest parks levy renewal and other vibrant communities polling results in the next month or so. And as I mentioned earlier, an update on our planting programs as well. The Preserving Trees and Development, for lack of a more elegant name, that tour is being moved to 2025 due to currently limited staff availability. At present, our permitting and regulation team continues to be working extra to help make the transition to the new Bureau, Portland Permitting and Development, successful. And that's in addition to all of their regular work. And we want them in the tour with you as they are the frontline implementers of city code and have witnessed a lot of these situations you're going to be looking at. So we're still excited about that and developing it. Thank you, Blake, for your work on that. We just have to move it back a few months. That completes my report. Happy to try to answer any questions.
No question. It goes back to the Mill City, or the Mill Park planting. You said that the Bureau of Transportation did that?
Yeah,
Portland Bureau of Transportation?
believe so. Mill Park neighborhood. Yeah, Portland Bureau of Transport.
Are you doing any investigation as to how they planted a bunch of trees under your Urban Forestry's watch, but no oversight from Urban Forestry on that?
Yeah, I don't know the details of that.
Are you looking into it?
Sorry.
Will you be looking into them
Sure.
based on this? I would appreciate that because I know that the city has done a lot of work to pull every tree planting thing from BES, Urban Forestry, under this purview.
Yes.
So it's unfortunate that perhaps this one has slipped through, but I know from my experience doing city projects, there was a large issue with some planting through Foster Road, for example, that I know that Urban Forestry and the Bureau of Transportation had to kind of work through. So I just was curious if this was maybe part of that or if that had already been kind of taken care of.
I can speak to a little bit, so.
Who are you?
Oh, I'm sorry. Hi, everybody. Casey Jogers, Permitting and Regulation Manager. Just in response to that, when our, what's referred to as MCM, which is Major Capital and Maintenance Projects Team, issues a permit, the responsibility to establish and manage the trees falls to the contractor or the permittee. So in this case, that would be PBOT. So, our role is to make sure that the project has been reviewed according to code, permit. We manage it through construction, but when that project has been completed, there's sort of this handover to those whomever owns that project. So in this case, it would have been PBOT.
Okay.
So that's why I think there is some misunderstandings. But we do hope that in the future, there might be a way where we'd be able to come back and do some quality control checks on some of those projects.
Yeah.
But we need to build staffing and program to be able to do that. But ultimately, right now, it's really the permit holder's responsibility once program or project completion has occurred to establish and manage their trees.
Okay, gotcha. Because I think that would be nice because holding, say, private companies and private development, that standard where I know there's the 2-year quality assurance that happens after everything has been closed off. Something like that could happen. So the city's holding itself accountable, the same as it's holding development accountable. I think would be nice and help to avoid this kind of publicity. But thanks for looking into it, you guys.
Thanks for bringing that up and sharing your experience.
Mr. Landau, Brian Landau. Snaps.
Yeah, hi, thanks. Casey, I really appreciate the question. I want to just note too that One of the things we're doing with PBOT specific to both the 82nd Avenue project that they're doing and the trees in the curb zone is we've been working with PBOT to review the contracts they make with their contractor to plant and establish trees under those projects. And so we've been including soil excavation and fill requirements that Urban Forestry came up with, and also making sure that taking the language from our tree planting contracts, which have really robust requirements around establishment, and making sure that PBOT's including those in there as well. So it's not something we can do on every project, but it's something that we're starting to do since it's just not an area of expertise that PBOT has, and they've been really open to including requirements that we typically include. So really appreciate your point, and there are some good things happening on that front.
Thanks, Brian.
Commissioner Nelson.
On heritage tree #1 removal, so is it in the heritage tree program, is it any heritage tree that needs to be removed for safety reasons? The city pays for that? Is that the policy, or was that because this was an outstanding tree with great renown that, in other words, it was on private property, I believe?
I'm sorry, I was.
Heritage tree #1.
Right, what was your question?
Urban Forestry expended a lot of financial resources that is taken away from other needs. And so I wondered why the property owner does not pay for that.
Well, this tree was actually a right-of-way tree, a street tree,
It was what?
a street tree. It was a street tree, and under the city
That is a
code.
street tree. It was, how many feet is it from the street? The right of way must be incredibly wide there.
So at one point, that tree was a private property tree. It grew and became a large tree and ended up entering into the right of way. And according to the city's requirements, a tree, any part of which root flare is in the right of way is a city tree, a street tree.
Interesting.
According to Title 11, for some time now, urban forestry is responsible for maintenance of heritage trees that are on city properties, not private.
Commissioner McMillan had a comment, and I had the same question. Are we gonna respond to Willamette Week?
Oh, thank you for the question, Commissioner Nelson. Thank you for this question, Commissioner McMillan. We in urban forestry and in vibrant communities, the public relations team have spent over 2 weeks providing information to the reporter on this. The story they wrote is a bit odd and didn't really reflect a lot of the information we had in there. And at this time, we aren't planning to have any response to it. We're just gonna move on.
So just one thought on that, that's really, unfortunately, their MO is to kind of reveal the dirt versus, in my view, a balanced picture. And so a letter to the editor, if we had the staff, that would be a balanced view. Could be beneficial. I mean, I think we need to start getting the balanced view on everything, trees out there, but, I'm not sure, the stuff for that, so.
Well, I appreciate Commissioner Feldstein, your interest in rectifying the public record.
Yeah.
As city staff, we are not, it's not appropriate for us to make comments like that or write letters to the editor.
Right.
Really be up to our public relations team and city leadership to decide how to respond. However, other people can write letters to the editor and have in the past. Commissioners can do that. And have in the past, as well as other types of communication, if you'd like to do that.
Anyone interested in taking the lead on a draft of that?
I cannot take the lead today. I unfortunately have many other things that I have to prioritize at this moment, but I would be happy to help where I could. But
Yeah.
I would have to wait a couple weeks before I have that free time.
Right.
But if you do send me some of the information that you covered here, Ms. Cairo, Forester Cairo, it'd be great if I could get some of that that you covered as to what is in error about their reporting.
I can do that. It will all be captured in the minutes. I'm guessing you'll want it prior to when the minutes are produced. Any time frame on that?
Yeah, usually trying to aim for a week before the next meeting. So, but I'm curious, like, if you'd need it sooner than that, I can also like draft what was written just for that part and share it. Maybe that would.
Yeah,
would
we
work.
can do that. Yeah, share it with all of the
Yeah,
commission.
with all of us, that would be great, and, yeah, I just have to comment that I am curious about the connection to public relations and the effectiveness of that. I mean, I just bring that up as like a global question as we think about, better communication about trees, so
Mhm.
I'm not sure if that's something we could have in as an agenda item or might
And-
be a good agenda item, calling them in.
And thank you, and
Yeah.
all the staff nodded.
Yeah.
It was a detail in my update on PSEF, but one of the areas that we now have funds to be able to develop is tree and urban forest education. And it has long been desired and numerous commissioners over many years have wanted more robust public communication, education about trees and urban forestry, things like making sure people know if they need a permit or not, for example, as well as the important role trees play in the city. And that is indeed part of our plan for those new funds. It'll take us a little while to get going on it, as I said earlier.
Nice. Okay, if there's not any other burning questions, we're sort of out of time, move on to, Title 11, public hearing debrief and recommendation. And I just want to clarify, Brian, what you want to get out of this. So maybe you could set the stage just a little bit.
Yeah,
Especially it's now been a while since we were at the hearing and sort of.
yeah. I have a short PowerPoint to kind of summarize where we're at in the process, to recap the public hearing, and then kind of lay out what the commission needs to do today as we bring this amendment to City Council. So I'm gonna get my screen shared and then get going on this. Let's see here.
I don't know if it's just me, but are we able to increase volume of his voice? Yeah.
Okay, are y'all able to hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, so and is the PowerPoint showing up on the screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. All right, so as a refresher on this topic, under current Title 11 language, the large tree provision will expire at the end of 2024. And staff's recommendation is to remove the December 31st, 2024 sunset clause to make it a permanent feature of the tree code. The Planning Commission and the Urban Forestry Commission held a joint public hearing on this on July 23rd as required by Title 11. And so we are moving forward in the process following that public hearing. At the same time, Urban Forestry is midway through a multi-year project to update Title 11. We are currently updating the Portland Urban Forest Plan and expect to bring that to City Council in spring 2025. Following the adoption of that plan, we'll undertake a Title 11 amendment project to align the code with the updated vision, goals, and canopy targets in the new Portland Urban Forest Plan. So at this point, with the large tree amendment expiring sort of midway through that work, we are making a recommendation to remove the sunset clause from the large tree amendment. So here's where we are in the process. We had the public hearing on July 23rd. On August 13th, which was this week on Tuesday, the Planning Commission held a work session to further discuss the proposed amendment, and they voted unanimously to support the staff's recommendation to remove the sunset clause. So that will be their formal recommendation that they will submit to City Council. Today, the Urban Forestry Commission is asked to approve their recommendation as well. So we'll have time for a brief discussion, and then the UFC will vote on what their recommendation to City Council will be. After that, staff will draft a statement from the Planning Commission and the Urban Forestry Commission, which will be submitted to City Council as part of the amendments ordinance package. So that statement will be emailed around to both commissions for any potential final edits, and before it's ideally approved by August 30th. And that will set us up to have this at City Council on October 2nd. So today is the opportunity for the UFC to discuss further, ask any additional clarifying questions, and then make a motion and vote on what their recommendation is. So I'm going to give just a little overview of what we heard at the public hearing and just a very brief refresh on what the large tree amendment is, as it's been a few weeks since we've had the public hearing. So at the July 23rd public hearing, around 60 in-person and written comments were received, with all those except for one voicing support for the large tree amendment. This included statements from organizations like 350 PDX, Trees for Life, Portland Neighbors Welcome, Bird Society of Oregon, East Multnomah County Soil and Water Conservation District, and Willamette Riverkeeper. And then Fish Construction was the one in-person comment that was voicing opposition to the large tree amendment. And again, just to restate how the large tree amendment changed Title 11 tree preservation requirements. Prior to the large tree amendment, this is the table on the left, which is the original Title 11 code in 2015. Just 1/3 of trees 12 inches or larger on site during development had to be preserved or a fee in lieu paid. And the fee for not preserving the tree was $1,800 per tree, regardless of the size of the tree. With the large tree amendment, which is the current policy, all trees that are 20 inches or larger are expected to be preserved. And if they're not, a fee of $450 per diameter inch is assessed. So starting at $9,000 for a 20-inch tree, and then it increases with the size of the tree. So that's the provision that will expire at the end of the calendar year. And that's the provision that the Planning Commission has recommended be made a permanent part of the code. And to restate that there are numerous exemptions to those mitigation and preservation requirements. Dead, dying, dangerous, and nuisance species trees are exempt, as are affordable housing projects. And importantly, lots under 5,000 square feet and projects with proposed or existing 85% or more lot coverage are also exempt. And these last two are important because they encompass 79% of the residential unit capacity in the buildable lands in inventory. So the large tree amendment is a targeted preservation and mitigation strategy for Portland's largest and most valuable trees that are largely outside of the areas where most of Portland's housing is zoned to be built. The large tree amendment has been extremely effective at preserving large trees. We've seen a 68% reduction in the number of large trees removed each year. At the same time, 83% of new housing, new units that have been built have been in those zones that are exempt from Title 11 preservation. So I think that's how we've seen that the large tree amendment has not had a negative impact on the production of new housing, which is consistent with the economic analysis we did prior to the current version of large tree amendment, which found that only 54 fewer housing units would be built over a 20-year period as a result of this. Which brings me to the code language that is part of the staff recommendation, which the Planning Commission approved as well. And this would remove the language which had provision sunset at the end of the current year. And I will stop sharing and then answer any questions and let the UFC hold a discussion and then vote.
Thoughts, questions from anybody? Or any debrief? I'm not sure who was first, but.
This is Bruce Nelson. I had a question on the 68%. Is that a reduction of large tree removal? Is that mean in development cases where properties are greater than 5,000 square feet, in those cases, and the footprint of the building that was to be put in place did not, where do you get the number from?
That's a really good question. Thanks, Bruce. So that is comparing the 3 years before the large tree, the 20-inch large tree amendment compared to the 3 years after. But you make a very good point. So the data in our permit system is limited when the project is exempt from Title 11. So you're exactly right. If a lot is under 5,000 square feet, and Casey, correct me if I'm getting this incorrect, but a tree plan is not required because the lot is exempt from Title 11 tree preservation requirements, which then means that tree removal information is not collected by Portland Permitting and Development, and so those tree numbers would not be in the permitting data database. So you're absolutely right that we don't have data on those lots under 5,000 square feet.
Thank you.
Commissioner Clark?
I was just gonna note that the joint meeting that we had with the planning commission, for those of you who weren't there, went really well. And it seems like there's a lot of support for this, so I personally think that this is a really good idea that we should vote in favor for. That's all I have to say.
I just had one quick question before we go to a motion. So what were just out of curiosity, what were the absolute numbers? So there was 68% reduction. How many trees actually is that?
Let me pull it up in my note. I have to look at the original PowerPoint for this. Sorry, it's gonna take me just a second.
While he's looking that up, any other thoughts from commissioners? Debrief, I know a lot of people were there and that was great. A lot of commissioners were there. Any thoughts, JR? Commissioner Lilly, Commissioner Meisner, Commissioner McMillan? Commissioner McMillan, no notes, okay.
I was able to pull that up. So in the 3 years prior, so this was 2017 to 2020, actually that's 4 years. There was an average of 365 trees 20 inches or greater removed each year. And then from 2021 to 2023, when the current version of the large tree amendment was in effect, an average of 114 trees 20 inches or more per year.
Thank you. Yeah, would anyone like to put forth a motion? So what's on the table and what the planning commission supported and the urban forestry recommendation was to remove the kind of the sunset clause, and you saw that up there. Would anyone like to, that's not a hand, put forward a motion to support removing the sunset clause?
I would put,
Question or thought?
No, I don't.
Okay. Thanks. Yes.
I would move to support that motion and or support removing the sunset and using the language that was proposed that we just saw put up by Brian Lando.
Any second? Thank you.
I will second.
Thank you. All in favor? Okay, looks unanimous. Thank you very much. Yeah, it's important. And I also want to thank the commissioners for, having a good discussion with the planning commission, and I think that's very helpful for future work together. So great. Okay, we're a little ahead of time. Anything else on this before we move on?
No, thanks everyone. So I'll be working with BPS staff to draft a statement. We're looking into whether it can be a joint Urban Forestry Commission, Planning Commission statement, since the recommendation is the same. I think we've done that in the past. So look for a draft of that to be in your inboxes, hopefully by the end of next week.
I also want to, I want to thank the commissioners for being there for the public. There was so much public commentary, and I think that was just an important supportive way of having that occur. All right, so we're gonna move on to a tree risk assessment briefing. Have a full hour on that, I'm sure. There'll be a lot of discussion.
I can give a quick introduction. Just that commissioners, as I'm sure you recall, we've had discussions about how is a tree deemed to be dangerous or not in this room, and you all asked for more information. And so we have folks here today who will introduce themselves to present that information for you and answer questions you may have.
Thanks, Jen. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, commissioners, staff, public. As Jen said, we're here at the request of the commission to understand a little bit more about our process and how we make determinations when we're out there looking at trees and how we determine that they're dangerous. So appreciate the opportunity to be able to be here and to present to everybody. As a reminder, I'm Casey Jogers, the Urban Forestry Permitting and Regulation Manager. And I have the pleasure of introducing you to our non-development tree inspection supervisor, Rebecca Chrysalis, who's sitting right beside me. Rebecca's been with the city of Portland since 2022. She holds several professional credentials and has brought quite a robust plethora of experience with her. She worked at the Disneyland Resort in relationship to the landscaping there, where trees are sort of considered props. And so there's a lot of construction and consideration for the trees as they move them around or make them look the way that they want to in Disneyland. So a pretty unique and valuable experience that she's brought to us with that. She's also worked in a municipal environment for the city of Beverly Hills, California, where she had a portfolio of many high-profile liability cases. And I recall from even interviews, a lot of conversation about work that she's done with root inspections and the type of cutting that can happen with roots, and that's still having safe trees or determining whether they're dangerous. And then right before she came to the city of Portland, she was working as a private consulting arborist, so on the private side. So a really robust sort of spectrum of experience that Rebecca's bringing to, or has brought to the city of Portland, and is helping manage our non-development team. Rebecca's quickly become a really important asset to our team and with her expertise. And so happy to introduce you to her, and now she's going to walk you through how her team performs those tree assessments.
Thank you, Casey,
Yeah.
for that very kind and generous introduction. Morning, commissioners. I'm honored to be part of this nationally respected program and team, urban foresters here in permitting and regulation. To you today about how we conduct our dangerous tree assessments. If you don't mind holding your questions till the end of the presentation, I'll have time to discuss and answer any questions. So we're going to look today at the Portland's urban forestry and regulatory team. We are going to go then through the tree assessment process with some case studies as examples, and then we'll open up the floor for questions. So we're going to be looking at our numbers. And data is the best objective way to orient ourselves in an urban forest. This helps us understand better the scale and the quantity before we delve into the quality. So we have here in Portland, 4.1 million total trees, both public and private. Of that amount, 2.9 million are private property trees. 1.2 million are park trees. And we have 220,000 estimated street trees. Between August 2023 and August 2024, We received approximately 4,500 removal replant applications. That is 0.1% of our estimated total tree population. And of that 4,500 amount, 191 of these applications for removal replants were denied, which is 4.2%. So permitting and regulation employs 31 skilled and experienced staff with a variety of industry standard certifications and licenses that are required to perform this work proficiently. However, someone can hold certifications and not have the applicable lived experience and mentality needed to be a successful inspector. Our total amount of years of professional experience, which is more than 100, only counts years working for the city of Portland. But all of our staff have a history prior to Portland of working for state and municipal organizations and private contractors and companies. Some staff hold qualifications and certifications above and beyond our minimum requirements, as well as advanced degrees. Our certifications require continuing education, both external and internal to the city of Portland, which support us in keeping up with an evolving industry and climate. Professionalism, expertise, and confidence are qualities we seek in staff hired. Before we look at our quality assurance program processes, of which training is a part, let's look at definitions because clarity and context matter. In permitting especially, we make judgment calls about living organisms, otherwise known as trees, within the context of a densely populated environment, which can be rapidly dynamic. This is part of our skill set as urban foresters. People alter their environment significantly to build and maintain cities, and we ensure minimal impacts to our forest resource that provide us with life-sustaining benefits. Clear parameters enable consistency in judgment. We must have boundaries that define our scope and activity that can be understood by all and can also be replicated efficiently and effectively. These are found in Title 11, along with our standards and definitions, and are critically important to our success, reliability, efficiency, and successfulness in establishing trust in the community that we serve. We balance this with every case being unique. In tree inspection assessments that involve a dangerous tree, consistency starts with defining dangerous trees, which is found in Title 11. Dangerous can be subjective based on tolerance, but the Title 11 definition focuses our team on agreed upon set of factors to review and apply our professional skill set in making determinations. Title 11 defines a tree with a high degree of risk as quote unquote dangerous. This is a tree that under normal weather conditions is predicted to fail within a certain amount of time and could cause damage to property or life. We live and work in an urban environment with many quote unquote targets, which is a technical term used in tree risk assessment, meaning people, structures, and assets. Some targets move, others are stationary. Some have regular occupancy during certain times of day. Others have consistent occupancy. All are valued. We define risk based on industry standards as the likelihood of failure impacting a target, plus the severity of the consequences to a target, plus the tolerance for these consequences. We identify the target, we identify the part of the tree most likely to fall or fail in technical terms. We identify the likelihood of failure and consider the consequence of failure. We ensure that all reasonable efforts have been made to accurately identify these factors at the time of assessment. Objective facts, data, and alternative options to removal are reviewed for the tree in question to balance preservation with public safety. So what does tree inspection look like in action? We'll explore that now. Again, we're working with trees and people, complex living organisms that don't always follow our best attempts at definitions, standards, and categorizations. However, systems, definitions, technical experience, skill, and some humility help to ensure that our assessments are as consistent, simple, and straightforward as possible, and that our interactions are personable. Title 11, permitted tree removals is placed into 3 categories: dead, dying, or dangerous. These conditions sound like they would be basic judgment calls, but in fact require technical expertise grounded in experience, skill. They're fact-specific, quantifiable determinations with these parameters defined in Title 11 based on industry best practices. So assessing a tree to be dead. How many limbs are viable on this tree? None, dead. But if there's, say, let's only 3 viable limbs out of 10, this tree would be considered dying. Dying gets more complex, but at a basic level, it's when the tree is more dead than alive. Other signals are observing a tree not closing over wounds with a normal amount of vigor for its species. We're seeing active beetle or fatal fungal infestations. For dying, with increased complexity, there's increased need for technical expertise to understand these signs, signals, and symptoms, so as to not confuse a state of irreversible decline with one that is temporary in nature. A good example of quote unquote dying is found in a southern magnolia. They drop leaves and remaining foliage begins to droop and discolor and curl, leading the untrained observer to think it could be dying, but in fact, this tree is preparing to flower. So then we have dangerous, which can be very obvious or very nuanced. Obvious signs: tree is visibly uprooting and falling out of the ground. A tree split and more than half of the canopy is broken off, leaving less than half of the tree standing. Or multiple large limbs have cracked in a weather event. These limbs are dangling in the tree by a thin strip of bark or held up by other limbs or branches. Or construction from nearby development has torn, cut, and or removed part of the tree's structural root plate. Or it can be more subtle, where a tree looks healthy, but the inspector identifies a pathogenic root decaying fungus, seen in this example, conks around a trunk base, that can cause the otherwise healthy, potentially healthy looking tree to eventually fall. As urban foresters, we bridge the gap between people and forests in very specialized ways. Our work requires a high degree of quality that depends on information we get from the trees we touch and steward. Combine this with observations made both researching a case and while in the field. We are employed as experts and we take that seriously. We are highly motivated to preserve the city's resources and ensure public safety. An effective quality assurance program has both internal and external quality control measures built in to ensure that what goes out the door meets the highest standards in the most efficient manner. This Venn diagram shows how the different quality control measures we have in place interact to create our comprehensive quality assurance program. This is built into our system, starting with Title 11 and external QC routes of an appeal and public posting that contribute to process improvements, increasing our quality assurance. If our inspectors determine that a case is complex enough to merit a second opinion, they're encouraged to consult with a colleague to review the case together and make the best determination. In addition to this, we have quarterly QC checks as well as random daily checks on permits that have been issued, and if needed, provide feedback to staff who are also encouraged to lift up their own feedback with, as Jen says, quote unquote, fresh eyes, if they notice something can be done better. We have robust training and mentoring for new hires, and we continue this training relationship between tenured and newer inspectors beyond the probationary timeframe. Trees always give us something new to discuss. The community expects quality, stability, timeliness, and integrity, and the system ensures we deliver. Next best thing to a ride along with one of our inspectors is a review of case studies to demonstrate how we work through removal applications. We will now look at 3 non-development dangerous tree assessment cases. So case 1. Private property Douglas fir. Application received April 9th, 2024. All inspections start in the office with a review of the case and pertinent details, then move into a field inspection and assessment. The inspector looks at the tree and its surrounding site, GIS and maps, any history from the property owner, applicant, and in the permitting database, and synthesizes this information with the facts present at the time of inspection. In the field, the neighborhood is considered, property, narrowing in on the tree from the ground up. 360-degree walking inspection of the tree occurs, assessing visible buttress roots, trunk, limbs, branches, viewing the tree in context from farther away and up close. The case facts for this tree include observing no fungal fruiting bodies at the time of inspection, no soil cracking, no signs of decay or structural issues, no stem destabilization signs present, and no nearby tree impacts or recent site changes. Therefore, this tree was denied for removal. In our case number 2, we start again in a linear process with this private property Douglas fir tree. The application was received April 24th, 2024. Starting again in that linear process with the neighborhood property, then tree, desk review. And then once we zoomed in on the tree, in this case, the ground around the tree, as you can see in that picture, shows signs that this Douglas fir was destabilized, meaning the tree's root plate or stem began to break apart from the ground. In this photo, you can see a 1-inch wide soil gap, and that soil gap continued in a ring around the base of that tree, which evidenced the stem was rocked beyond capacity to support. Combining this in the moment field observation with the history seen in our permitting database, research of the property, that there was a previous removal approved a month prior in the same area for a visibly leaning Douglas fir that was destabilized in the January storm. It's reasonable to conclude that this more subtle, because the tree was not visibly leaning, destabilization likely occurred in the January 2024 storm. This tree was in an environmental overlay, but because it was quote unquote dangerous, it could be processed and permitted through our working group rather than being referred to PP&D. And the tree in this case was approved for removal. So this is our third and final case. We have one right-of-way street red maple tree application received in July 2024. Our inspector's risk assessment started again after desk research with a visual 360-degree walking inspection, where it was verified and observed that a quarter of this tree's canopy broke off, exposing decay that had caused the scaffold limb to fall. Scaffold is another technical term meaning a large limb that defines and supports a tree's canopy. And as seen in this photo, there's also visible a large crack, which got my little arrow there, you can see this here. A large crack between one of the remaining scaffold limbs at its base. The 3 other scaffold limbs remain mostly attached to the trunk, but the stability of the other attachments are additionally compromised due to the failure and missing limb. There are no reasonable alternatives in this case, such as pruning or cabling for this tree that exist. And so because of that, the severity of the defects, shortened time frame within which remaining limbs could fail, combined with the location in a planting strip where The tree falling apart has the potential to cause harm by disrupting traffic flow, injuring people, damaging vehicles or nearby home. This street tree met the criteria for removal under dangerous and was approved. So thank you for your time and attention today and for your care and dedication to Portland's urban forest. The floor is now open for questions and discussion.
Thank you very much. Very interesting. Any questions, thoughts? Maybe you could flip that to the person view, if you could close that out,
yes.
and then we could just sort of see better who's there and who might have a question.
Great.
Was that a question from Commissioner Meisner?
Yes,
Okay, thank you.
cool. Yeah, first question is, so you reference a lot, well, thank you for your presentation, first of all. My first question is with, when you mentioned like that inspectors adhere to like industry standards, who sets those industry standards?
Yeah, great question. So there's the International Society of Arboriculture. They have best management practices that they supplement with our ANSI 300 standards. So for the most part, those would be standards that we're looking at.
Okay, and is there any with the ISA, is there any sort of oversight with the ISA with the creation of those standards? Because as far as my understanding, ISA is essentially an unregulated body, like there's no government oversight, it's just essentially the Society of Arborists.
Sure, so ISA works on establishing ethics practices and, but the American National Standards Institute, ANSI 300s, that is a regulated governmental body organization that does supply standards and directives on how to assess trees in construction, pruning under utility, around utility lines, a variety of different standards in that ANSI 300 category exist for that direct our work.
Okay, and so ANSI, is that like a federal like body, or how, like who is ANSI, I guess is my question.
We can get back to that. Yeah, I don't want to give you the wrong information.
It's an American National Standards Institute, and I'm pretty sure it's a federal. I'm not sure. I better shut up.
Okay, well, we looked that up. Any other questions, thoughts? Was that all you had questions about, Commissioner Meisner, or?
I might have more,
Okay.
but feel free for anyone else.
We'll wait
to
for the
ask
answer. Okay. Commissioner Nelson, you had your hand up.
Let's see. A lot of the questions and concerns of the public related to Douglas fir trees that were failing in the storm events. And when you talked about analyzing trees for hazard, how do you, it's under normal conditions, and when you have hurricanes or tornadoes or saturated soils with strong winds events, which are not normal, but they occur fairly regularly in Portland over history. How do you see hazard risk evaluation as trying to alleviate the fears that members of the public may have regarding the large Doug firs that they live in proximity to?
Great question. I think part of the reassurance that we provide in an inspection is that inspector's ability to connect with the tree owner and the property owner. And they are certified arborists. Some of them have certifications beyond that. And so essentially, instead of taking your car into the mechanics come to you, and we're here to look at what's present and to discuss that what we see, unbiased by any profit motive, would not meet criteria at that time for being deemed a hazard tree or a dangerous tree. Again, abnormal weather events aside, a perfectly healthy, stable, non-risky tree could fail or break apart in an abnormal weather event. That,
Yeah, I mean, I know private arborists are struggling with this all the time. They're called to give an evaluation because their reputation is at stake. And contrary to what some people may think, I mean, I live near Big Doug firs, and believe me, I look at them and I want them to be there much longer than I will be there. And I'm amazed that one in particular is still there, but it is, but I mean, I want to believe, contrary to what Mr. Cumberland says, I believe that skilled arborists can look at trees and in many circumstances determine, yes, that tree is likely to fail. Even though the tree may look healthy, just because of the site changes that are occurred. I think a lot of that is predictable, but I don't think the members of the public have that reassurance yet. And that's part of the fault of the arboriculture industry, that it's not uplifting the quality of the people that are within the industry. And certainly the city is not geared up to do PR. Urban forestry is notoriously slow for PR, but that's another issue. But nevertheless, there needs to be concerted effort on the part of industry and urban forestry to reassure people that, look, we know what we're doing. We do make mistakes sometimes, they're correctable, but we have trained people. There are plenty of skilled arborists. If you want your trees evaluated, contact a reputable, experienced arborist, and they will look at your trees. And they will give you a detailed report on them. But we're not there yet, so hoping for that to improve.
I would agree with you, Commissioner, wholeheartedly. And I do know that even on top, there's arboriculture, but then there's also urban forestry. And so I know actually right now, the International Society of Arboriculture is holding their annual conference in Atlanta. It's their 100-year conference. And there are presentations and people being recognized in the urban forestry industry who are working on getting more, I guess, public awareness around the role of an urban forester and how that differs even from a certified arborist. So, but agree. Thank you for that.
Yeah, I was happy to see your 2-page, post-storm debrief. It seemed like it very efficiently got to, a lot of important facts for the public. And I guess then the question is, so how many people are reading it and seeing that information, and, how could we sort of improve upon both getting that out there, but also, maybe some other basics. Are there those really big indicators that property owners should be looking for? Yeah, we could say, yeah, go spend the money and routinely get, a professional to look at it, but you know, let's face it, a lot of people are gonna skip that, right? It's pretty expensive and. So just wondering about your thoughts on that and sort of the future of public communication about prevention.
Education.
Yeah.
Perhaps I should,
Oh, okay.
can help. Um, Another excellent question. And in my report today, I gave you all an update on ESEF funds. One of the funding packages that was allocated by city council to urban forestry starting this past July 1st. It's what we're calling tree protection and care. It includes many new initiatives like street tree maintenance. One of the other ones you may have heard me mention was urban forest and tree public education. And this is what we mean by that. We're really looking forward to finally having the resources to have staff whose job it is to figure out our communication and education strategies for the general public, for other bureaus, other entities we work with, and lead that implementation.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it seems like we could do a lot better with, even in advance, when we know a storm may be coming in, you got to have people's ears and, you know, having the media know that this is part of their role to get the word out and, yeah, et cetera. So.
Absolutely. Did you want to
Yeah,
add?
yeah, I was gonna add a little bit, just putting a plug in for our single point of contact tree hotline, who does do a lot of work. It's not outreach as you were talking about, but there is an available hotline to talk to somebody. And ask those types of questions if there are concerns, which will get routed to a team. Maybe it'll be Rebecca's team where that would result in an inspector coming out. So we can always do better, but I just want to say there is that tree hotline there and they do a lot of communication with the public about questions, concerns that they have. And then secondly, related to what City Forester Cairo was saying is that PSEF, there was also mention of reduction of non-development fees. And so when inspectors go out and they take a look at trees, you know, there's a time span essentially, that's sort of industry standard that you're looking at. And inspectors, myself, Rebecca, tree techs are always talking to the public on saying, you know, if you see any change in condition, please reapply, right? This is not a decision in perpetuity forever. And so when we have this PSEF program coming to help reduce non-development fees, I think there's a connection point there that reduces this burden of, well, I don't want to keep having to pay for that, although a concern may come about. So I think that, you know, there's some things coming in the future that will help that, where it's, you know, it's not a one and done type situation when a tree gets denied. Again, as Rebecca started the presentation off with, they're living organisms and they change over time. And we can't be everywhere all at once. And so there is a need for property owners to reach out to us. And I think a reduction in those application fees will help maybe make that connection point more frequently for those types of concerns.
Commissioner Meissner?
Yeah, thank you. I do have a couple follow-up questions, if that's all right. So to follow up on some of these questions around trust issues with the public. So the reason why I'm asking like who creates these industry standards is because, for example, like with other professions, like doctors, lawyers, plumbers, accountants, like we all receive our licenses from the government. And like these state boards ensure that our standards have the public's best interests at heart. And with ANSI and ISA, they're both private organizations. How can the public trust that these industry standards are in the public's best interest?
And I would say to be a member of these organizations, to be a member of the International Society of Arboriculture, their ethics statements, of course, that's an honor system. But there are industry leaders who are passionate about trees, they're passionate about public safety. People that have PhDs in forestry, people that have had decades of experience. These are people that come together, that join and provide many publications that are used by landscape architects, by each other in this profession, that have published works that have been vetted. You know, I think it's an interesting point that you make, Commissioner Meisner, about a lack of a state or a federal program that's overseeing a particular certification for this industry. This could be something that may be working on, that leaders in our industry are working on, because we do value, like, there are people, anyway, we very much value this charge that we've taken up. That would be, looking at trees and balancing those trees in a forest within an urban environment. I'm gonna stop talking now. Brian Lando has his hand raised. I'm gonna let Brian Lando take the floor.
Yeah, I was just gonna clarify that ANSI sets standards across dozens and dozens and dozens of different industries. It includes things like nuclear energy standards, electrical vehicle charging standards, healthcare information technology. So our arboriculture, unlike accounting or the legal sector, they're not regulated by, like, those professions are implementing, adhering to federal and state laws. So it makes sense that they would be regulated by those types of governments. That's not really the case with ANSI standards. So that's why it's not like a federally regulated industry. But ANSI exists specifically to fill in that gap, and that's what they've been doing for over 100 years. And there's tens of thousands of organizations that actually collaborate and participate in that. So just want to provide a little bit of specifics about ANSI as well. And I see Jen has her hand up as well.
To add to that information, one does not simply sign up or just pay to get an ISA certification. They have to meet minimum qualifications in order to be considered for the certification. And then that has to be maintained on an annual basis by earning what are called continuing education units. And those are field trainings, book trainings, other types of interactions with other arboricultural professionals that are intended to keep folks up to date on the latest developments in the field and science of arboriculture. And that is no simple task to do that. And I'll reiterate, as Supervisor Priscilla said before, that our staff all have the ISA certification, and in addition, many other certifications of higher level, as well as many years of experience doing the work. And the experience can't be overstated. As Rebecca said earlier, even if somebody with the certifications we need to see apply for a position with urban forestry, they need to have the experience of doing the work across different tree species in an urban environment in order for us to bring them on board. That said, we have robust internal training and support so that decisions that we reach are the best possible.
Commissioner Meisner, was there a specific area, and honing in on your question, was there a specific area that you think there's need for work in terms of trust with the community?
Oh, not really. Just
Okay.
general questions based on like the lack of trust after the winter storm, with like things that are in the media. Just trying to get a better idea of how the public can trust these certifications, because for example, like in finance, there's tons of certifications and most of them are kind of worthless. So I'm just trying to narrow down how the public is able to trust your certifications, if that makes sense.
No, it's interesting you use the word trust, because I would use the word fear, that there's more fear, around the storm, and it may be that there's also some trust issues. I'm not really sure. Yeah. And how do we, I mean, they're very real issues. Commissioner Cole?
Yeah, I'd love to comment a little bit. Thanks very much for your additional questions, Commissioner Meisner, because I think it's important to note that there is a trust issue. And I think one thing that should be accounted for is almost just a mistrust of government often. So it's not necessarily
Yeah.
the trees versus something else. It often comes with just a regulatory body. Do they have your best interest in mind? And I think that definitely comes into play. I can speak specifically for arboriculture where one thing we're talking about particularly here is the tree risk assessment qualification. And I wrote an article and I sent it over and showed it to everyone here. And that really, in that I tried to explain that there are a lot of qualifications, and rather there are not a lot of qualifications that you can get in urban forestry and arboriculture. There's essentially one body and they base their best management practices, as Supervisor Chris Collis was saying, on peer-reviewed studies through many different urban forestry and arboriculture journals. So they are taking the basis of how is this tree actually functioning and what conclusions can we make in a scientific manner in order to make new recommendations for that. So it's a lot more in depth, and they also, for that particular qualification, audited that some years ago to make sure that their risk qualification is at par with other different risk assessments that are done. You brought this up, I think, several meetings ago. I don't know particularly when, but you noted that in your experience, there are different assessment qualifications that really have to take a lot of qualitative and quantitative assessments into consideration. And that's one thing that they did. They had this first one that was called Trace, and they looked at it and said, this does not meet the qualifications or meet the standards of what tree or what not even tree, just risk assessments are across any other industry. So they redid that in, I think, 2012 or 2010. In order to bring those standards of the tree risk qualification up to a new standard that met this audited kind of finding. So it does have a lot to do with that. And you are right, there are essentially two different organizations, but those are the organizations that take it very seriously because it is a new kind of professionalized thing. 100 years ago, arboriculture didn't really exist. And so in terms of plumbing and all these other things, we are really still in the works trying to figure this out and how to deal with it. But we've come a very long way, and it's very robust now in terms of the research and science behind tree risk assessments. But I wanted to say all that and then bring up or ask a question to staff who's here and ask about different oversight in terms of quality assurance. And I know you noted that a little bit in there, but what I wanted to know is if there's any protocols to help determine if an inspector has made a proper choice in one way or the other. So say a tree is allowed to be removed and they say, yes, this tree is dangerous, when in reality it perhaps wasn't, or vice versa, where a tree was denied where there was actually something that was wrong because of, whatever, who knows what the situation could be. But are there any of those kinds of reviews where another inspector or perhaps one of you would go out and essentially check the work before the tree's cut down, before something actually happens?
Yes, I'll field that question, Commissioner Clapp, and then, but before I field that, I just want to add on to your excellent explanation about our risk assessment program that these certifications and these other ANSI standards are all assessing engineered, human manufactured systems and things. And so trees are not, they're their own living structure. And so a lot of people will make a medical metaphor to trees, but in some ways that doesn't quite fill in the gap that a tree is a living organism that is also a structure that's building upon itself. And so there's architecture there. Of course, we use trees in buildings. So there's a lot of dynamic work that goes into making a good tree assessment. And that work, what I spoke to earlier, can't necessarily be gained by a certification. It needs to be gained in the field, touching trees, seeing trees under normal circumstances, abnormal circumstances. So just to kind of make a point there about the dynamic aspect of what we do. So as far as your question, Commissioner Clapp, about our internal QC process. Several years ago, potentially, I'm not quite sure how long ago, Casey was working on creating a more robust system, getting more employees in so that we could not only handle our permitting volume, which of course needs to come in and go out within a reasonable amount of time, but also provide more robust internal QC. And so senior tree inspector position was created. That has been filled in both of our permitting working group capacities. Jesse Nellis will be presenting after we're finished on this one, our senior tree inspector for our group. And so that role really provides a lot of in the moment assistance. We'll go out, we'll conduct ride-alongs, we'll look at what the tree inspector is looking at along with the tree inspector, especially newer ones, help guide them into a proper decision. And then also, again, our external processes come from a public appeal or a public posting. So it's a kind of a multifaceted approach because again, I only put our 4,500, just between that year timeframe, 4,500 was just removal replant applications. That is the bulk of our work in this working group here. But we have a lot of other permits that come through with a lot of other different functions. So, that volume is there and we have to be really attentive to that. So do as much as we can for sure.
So Casey, did you have a comment?
Yeah,
Sorry, I was
really
confusing
quick.
Casey's. I
It's
think I put
okay.
this Casey in front of
It kind of ties to a few things that Commissioner Meisner as well as Commissioner Clapp has said. It's about capacity. So in relationship to the conversation about trust, we've been really fortunate with the parks local levy to be able to start building capacity. And with that capacity, our tree inspectors are able to spend more time with property owners. And that's where our trust is building. There was a time where we really had to hit and run and try to just as fast as we can because lots of people are waiting for permits, but we're in a phase of growth that gives us this opportunity to spend more time with people. And I've been there myself and it really does help create that trust. The tree inspector will walk around that tree with the property owner, explain to them what's happening and why. And so that's something that's growing. So I know that doesn't speak to necessarily like the media aspect of the outreach and everything, but I think each time we do have an opportunity to spend more time with property owners who have submit an application to us about something and explain to them what's happening, that is a component of building that public trust.
Do you have one other thing, just to add, or it's another question. I don't know if, Commissioner Meisner wanted to comment on that, because we've kind of been circling around it, but I have an unrelated question, that I would like to ask afterwards.
Okay, any other comments on the topics that have been? One of the questions I had related to trust is maybe you could walk us through how a concern for safety is, on private property or whatever. I mean, I'm not talking about something that's fallen into the right of way that becomes sort of a clear emergency, but how a private citizen application related to a safety concern, how it's triaged, where does it go in, you know, in line, how much do they have to pay? What's the tracking around that? You know, what's the data that we have and is anything followed and anyway. So,
I can respond and then Rebecca probably want to add to that, but if anything is identified as dangerous or concerning, then it would get called into our tree hotline, and then there would be some triaging that's happening right there. So if it's on private property, the tree techs would be advising them to call a contractor and take a look at it. We do have retroactive tree permits. And so it does not prevent a property owner from managing a risky, dangerous situation. And the majority, I would say, of contractors around Portland know that. You know, we get a fair quantity of those. So that's sort of the first step. Like, there's a situation that cannot wait, please don't wait. And the tree techs are really good at having those conversations. Our tree techs also do all of the intake. So if there's something that calls their attention, and I would say it's infrequent, but they will come to their supervisor and say, you know, hey, should we move this up the line? You know, that's different than somebody who's contacting us saying, hey, I've got this really urgent situation. And then I think I handed off to Rebecca in terms of the process of like, if it comes in sort of in a standard process, and then, you know, it gets assigned to her team. And then there's the process there in terms of, you know, tree inspector goes out. And what Rebecca was speaking to earlier, that if there's any question of a tree inspector, that's why we now have senior tree inspectors. So it's an expectation that they would go talk to their senior would go out on site. If the senior has questions or concerns, they go to the supervisor. And then it comes to me. Sometimes we pull in our operations team to really do, you know, a very robust quality control. There's been situations where we've had the city forester and all the managers out on site looking at situations. So there are those internal quality control as well as with the property owner. So that communication isn't sort of kept with us. We're communicating with the property owner. And for example, the time where, you know, we've all come out, you know, we make sure to contact the property owner, let them know, hey, we're going to be coming out to take a look at what's happening here. And of course, it's their property. So they may choose to be there and hear us and participate in, you know, the inspection that we're doing. Sorry, I don't know.
That was comprehensive.
and what about the cost? I mean, you know, so you want to cut down a tree or do something with a tree, this is making a mess, it's lifting the sidewalk versus I'm afraid that this is gonna fall on my house or. So is there any difference in fee structure or kind of the time frame in terms of their ability to respond?
Timeframe, absolutely.
Yeah.
If it's an emergency, it gets called into our emergency hotline or essentially transferred there, in which our operations team would go and respond. If it's a street tree and or if it will impact the public right of way. So it can still be a private tree that there's a situation where our operations team will go out and then sort of triage what might happen there. As it relates to fee structure, our removal replant applications right now are the same cost, whether you're doing retroactive or you're sort of waiting in line because there's not a significant concern. However, again, that's something that the PSEF package hopes to take a look at in terms of sort of reducing cost burdens as it relates to applications. And then there are some community programs that are out there and we're looking to grow that as well in terms of assistance to property owners. So say they do have a situation that they're like, I know I need to take care of it, but I don't have the financial means to do so. Again, our tree techs and our entire staff knows some resources to send them to seek out assistance. And again, we hope internally to build that a little bit more so we can have a more robust portfolio of ways to assist property owners that find themselves in these situations.
Yeah. You know, one of the things that we kind of bring from the medical side in terms of safety is, you know, you want to reduce any kind of barriers that there might be to reporting. And, you know, the idea, and so it gets back to the trust issue. If, you know, we could say to the public, if you have any concerns about the safety of your tree, here is our expedited paperwork, you know, whatever that looks like. And so make it really easy to report. And then also that there's not a cost for that. So it's just something that I kind of sort of throw out there as a place that I would love to get to. I mean, I think a perfect example is that a friend of mine had a couple of trees fall on their house in the last storm in the southwest in a highly treed area. And in retrospect, it was, yeah, I was worried about those trees, but it was kind of too much for a hassle and I didn't want to go pay a fee. So I think we're looking at some of that. So anyway, yeah.
But just to comment on that, one of the biggest issues, I think, is that the city only really has the ability to manage the trees in the right of way and on parks. So if there is a tree that someone is nervous about on an adjacent property that's not public, they can only call another arborist in the private sector to go out and look at it. And I know there's things like the pothole hotline where you can take a picture and put it into an app and send it off. And that's reasonable. The city manages their roads, so you can send that straight away. Whereas if someone did that with a tree and they took a picture of every tree that they thought was perhaps dangerous or something, it would be off the charts. And it would also be way more trees that the city doesn't have the actual purview to cover. You can see what a pothole looks like. It's not a flat road, but not everybody can look at a tree and say that tree is healthy versus dangerous.
Yeah.
So I think it would be a good idea. I would want to see something where the city could easily look at something like what you're talking about. Like, I have a concern about a tree, send it in and have the city be able to triage that and say, yeah, okay, here's the situation. Go call this person. Like, this is what your next steps would be. I think that would be helpful, but it would definitely need to be tempered in some way because it could go off the charts quickly and easily. One thing I do want to add or ask again to our presenters here is how much funding is available for the inspector staff to get continuing education units? Because I know you've amped up, so now how many inspectors do you have through all development, including senior and supervisor that actually do inspection work?
Just development or the entire?
All inspectors.
Yeah, let's do all inspectors.
13.
13. So how much funding is available for them to go to, say, the Pacific Northwest Annual Training Conference in October?
So that, do you want to answer that?
Required certifications, anything they're required to hold the position, those are all budgeted for, so there's no expense on staff member for that.
Mhm.
We also have a guideline on elective training if folks want to go above and beyond that, and we set aside, Brian will probably give me a number any second now. We set aside money out of our budget for that purpose. Market it across our staff, encourage people to do it if it is in any way germane to their current role. And we also encourage them to consider what their career objectives are. And if they can link those up and get that training, we encourage them to do that. Brian, do you know what this fiscal year, our elective training budget is?
Yeah, for, as Jen said, we cover the cost for all required certifications. And then in addition to that, our budget is $500 per staff for voluntary elective trainings. And so each work group can kind of decide, is that for $500 for each individual to go and find their own, or do they want to pool that together for a sort of joint training opportunity? Yeah, that's something that we've increased over the last few years because it's obviously important to invest in the training and expertise of our staff.
Yeah.
By consolidating the funds, moving that per capita amount around, I think we have very infrequently, if ever, declined a staff member's interest in attending a relevant conference. If we have somebody headed to Chicago soon, a couple folks will be in California for MFI. Yeah.
Okay.
Sort of thing.
Excellent. Yeah, because I think that would be the most important thing for two reasons. One, science is changing with this all the time. So making sure that each staff member that is going out and looking at trees is familiar with the most up-to-date science and research and has no barriers or few barriers to actually go out and get those continuing education credits. But also I think it's important for trust within the community so that an arborist that sees the city of Portland inspector that they work with all of the time at the same conference, they're sitting around a table, listening to the same talk, having that same discussion. It's really helpful to have the largest city in Oregon working with the most amount of trees in any one of those cities, working with the people, so you actually have that interaction. So I think it's important that that having people go out to things like the training conferences would help with trust, and it would also help with making sure that they are, as I believe the city is, if it is arborist versus arborist, the city gets the say. That should be backed up with those inspectors having all the same training as the arborist that is not working for the city that could be saying something different. So that would be important to make sure you keep it at that level or increase it as best you can with your PSAF funds that are coming through.
I have a comment and question, so it relates to that kind of quality control review that you were bringing up. So again, you know, borrowing from the medical playbook, it would be pretty standard that if we have a new employee, we do like a small random sample review of cases, right, early on, or we might do that if there's a concern expressed. So just something to think about. I have no idea if that's, you know, that takes a lot of effort for maybe the not the most important way to kind of improve the program, but so that's kind of your proactive type of review. But I think also what the public has brought up is retrospective review in the case of like a near miss. And just wondering what that looks like now and what you might see it in the future. And getting back to my question about data and tracking ability to cases. So if you could kind of embed that in that would be great.
Yeah, so we track, we have quarterly QCs, and I'm gonna Jesse speak a little bit more into this, but essentially, we have quarterly QCs. These are tracked on Excel spreadsheets. We have major components of a permit that we look at in our database for permits that have gone out the door. We randomly pull 10% of those permits every quarter, check that.
Yeah. Yeah, so I've been in this position of senior tree inspector for almost 2 years now.
Yeah.
And so it has given us an opportunity to look into some ways to improve the program, which mentioned the QC checks. So Rebecca and I have worked together to form that QC program, and as Rebecca mentioned, 10% of, so every inspector on the non-development side, because I only do QCs for non-development, but we do, I look at 10% of every permit that's been issued by each inspector. And we have a whole variety of permits. Removal or replant permits are just one of them. So I try to get a balance of in that 10% of the variety based on the, you know, removal replant is the most, and so I try to get larger percentage of that 10% for removal replants, and then smaller percentage for permits that are issued. So it correlates with the time that the inspectors spend on inspections out in the field. We have had some new staff come on, and that's been part of their training. And so all the new staff that's been brought on board since I've been senior tree inspector have gone through this QC, and I think we've seen improvements in the quality control that we've been. I mean, it's measurable. Yeah.
Also have onboarding new hire training. And one of the things that drew me to this profession was the ability to apprentice and mentor. It wasn't just something that you go to school and you learn. I think in the medical industry, it's learn one, teach one, share one. And so we do that here. You know, we take our new hires out into the field, and with the newer senior tree inspector position, permits are looked at for the first month of employment together, to mentor someone, to show, especially people that come from the private, come into a government position. There's a certain way to, you know, approach similar issues, but, you know, a certain way to communicate about things, and, you know, a different kind of level of responsibility that is important to us as government employees that we want to respect. So we do have a very robust fire training program that does proceed after that first month into varying stages of independence.
And what about retrospective review of, more kind of dangerous situations? That came up with our public commenter in the past. It was a question. So is that something we routinely do? And I guess you have to be informed, know about it, so that's a tricky.
That's right.
So.
I think they fall
What are your
into-
thoughts on that?
I
Yeah,
think some of it falls into that QC there, that, because they're pulling random, so they're not necessarily selecting for those, but those come in there. And then we also do, as an entire team, of permitting and regulation field days where we go out and look at each other's cases. And tree inspectors and staff walk us through what was the situation, what was the decision, was there a public component to it? So that's
Right.
a retro type thing that we do as an entire team, so that there's an understanding of inspectors in development versus inspectors in non-development. But I don't think that there is we don't specifically seek out the ones. But I guess, I don't know that people even apply in that manner for us to be able to filter in that way. And again, if something's called into us as dangerous, it reps a different way already. So
Yeah.
it would be, it's something we could of course think about as we start to use our new asset management system, tree plotter, in terms of having some more sort of retroactive type assessments.
Right.
And I think
Right.
that, that would be something that we can consider, but I do think by default, some of it does fall into that 10% random. pool.
right. Yeah, unfortunately, the rare events, often would not fall into a 10% sample, right? So if you hear about a death, major property damage or what have you, either by the person's complaint or reported in the media, I guess the question in my mind would be, okay, was the city involved in any way? If so, how? And really, since we're responsible for the canopy, in a sense, even thinking about it more globally, could we have done more to do more public training? That type of thing. So being able to have a statement about, okay, what is the role of the city in these rare events? And be able to articulate that to the public, I think is important. And thinking about, even if the city was not involved, more globally, how could they have helped the public? I think is important to sort of be able to articulate. And not be afraid of, the fellow who came in, and in fact, there was a connection to the city and there was a very reasonable response that urban forestry could have had about that, to be able to sort of, without fear, articulate what that was. Anyway, I'm rambling a little bit, but anyway, go ahead.
I'm realizing we're.
Yeah,
really
we're
close
out
on
of time too, yes.
But I've been holding a couple things.
Sure.
And I'll add one to respond to your great question and proposals. When it comes to after incident assessments, that is a role played by our certifying and regulatory organizations. So, for example, ANSI standards get reviewed and updated as a result of what the experience of the industry has been. Same with ISA standards and trainings. And in some ways, that's additionally helpful because it isn't anecdotal. It's looking at data sets that are much larger. And especially when it comes to living things in different situations, our folks need to know those specifics, but there's also generalities that can be drawn when there's a larger population to draw from. And we're not set up to do that kind of research, and I doubt we ever will be. But Commissioner Clapp was referencing the peer-reviewed publications as a part of that. And then I just wanted to remind folks that the permit fees We in urban forestry do not choose to charge them. We're required to charge them by the city structure because we are supposed to recover the cost of the service. Our non-development fees are heavily subsidized in order to try to make them more accessible. We all agree that they are still a barrier, and again, we're really excited to have this PSEF funding so that we hopefully can remove or eliminate a lot of those because we know it's a problem. In the meantime, Manager Jogerst and her team have developed some fee waiver policies based on financial hardship. And advertise those in the tree text at 823 Tree, know about those and promote them. And then the last thing I wanted to mention, and maybe one of the permitting regulation team could speak better to it, but we're also in a situation to have to require dangerous tree removal, not infrequently, as part of our role as ensuring public safety. And I don't know if anyone has any numbers on that, but it is a role we must do, want to do, where someone reports a tree they think is dangerous. We get involved with that tree and determine it is indeed dangerous, and have to tell the property owner they need to remove it, and we have to make that happen. I think that knowing that helps balance kind of the view of dangerous tree management. You want to add anything, do, but otherwise. Okay.
I would just add, because I think you had brought up a scenario previous that I'm thinking of that situation where if it's on a neighbor's property or something. Again, the tree hotline, I will say, I always wish that when the Title 11 was implemented, we had a much more robust, like on buses, like call 823 Tree. But really that is an asset for Portlanders that is probably underutilized or not as well known. But if you live on a property and your neighbor's tree looks like it's in a precarious, dangerous situation, that can be called in and we can and will go out and investigate that. It is just limitation in terms of crossing over private property. So our standard process is to say to the person who called it into us, can we go into your backyard? Can we view it from your property? Because they're giving us permission. So we do have some limitations, but there is an avenue. You're not just, there is an avenue for the city to assist to a certain degree if it's not on your property, but you're seeing that there is a true concern.
Okay, well, it looks like we need to move on. We're out of time. So I see we don't have a quorum at this point, and so I'm not sure how you want to handle the next agenda item, if it's something we need to defer to the next meeting versus, hearing about it and then having an email vote or that type of thing.
Yeah, so Title 11 requires 6 votes of the UFC to approve the removal of a heritage tree.
Right.
We only have 5 present right now. Commissioner McMillan had to step off. So we're not able to vote over email, and so this would need to be delayed until the next month's meeting. Yeah, I guess I'd defer to other staff in the room on kind of if that changes how this tree needs to be handled, if there's any kind of safety concerns.
Was a risk assessment done on this tree? What was the outcome?
We felt it was so we have internal risk assessment process, standard operating procedures that are taken from the tree risk assessment qualifications. This tree, the likelihood of impacting a target and impacting high voltage power, the roadway. This tree is a street tree. It's in a planting strip. So the likelihood of impact consequences, that would be higher. However, the time frame within which this tree could fall did not technically, with our best assessment and looking at this tree, probing that with some of our tools and sounding mallets, we didn't feel like this tree was an urgent enough removal to require our retroactive heritage tree permitting process. So yeah, delaying for another month. I think that would, it's hard. I mean, it's a little bit hard because we're here because there are defects observed. Yes, Jen.
I say, we'll assess that.
Okay,
And if it
Okay.
needs to be removed urgently, then it becomes an emergency and the city forester has the authority to direct that removal and bypass the forestry commission. And we did that with Heritage Tree One, for example.
yeah, because we haven't voted to take to delist that one yet either, correct?
We'll do that as housekeeping at some point since the tree is gone.
Yeah.
Right.
But yeah, I was going to suggest that would be that we do push it off for one more month. And just ensure that we do have 6 members and maybe put it at the front of the meeting next time.
Yes.
But another thing is if it does get to the point where urban forestry can provide some heavier pruning to make sure that any risk is mitigated before we can say, okay, now we need to go through the process appropriately. I'm sure you have the authority to do that as well through the operations crew. So perhaps that could be another option, just in case there is something that would be more imminent without actually removing the tree entirely. But I'll leave that to you guys kind of discuss, see if that works.
Thank you.
Very good. Sounds like we have a plan on that. Thank you, everybody, commissioners, and yeah.
Thank you all. Great
on that
discussion.
end. Good discussion.
so much.
Yeah.
Jesse and Sam, see you next month. And Rebecca.
Better just.